comparison, it's now day 286 of this revolution. It's really insane. The Islamic regime's supreme leader is blaming corruption on the judiciary. So according to him, all the violence, the deaths, and the oppression are because of the judiciary.
Yes, you're going to love this one. And he also says that Iranians have lost trust in the judiciary. So he blames everything on, get this, malpractice and false representation. This is all, according to him, these are the problems in Iran right now. So I'm going to share a quote that he shared in an address. He says, quote, "There's a small minority who abuse their position and tarnish the image of the judiciary in the eyes of the people. When corruption enters a system, this disease spreads. It is increasing day by day." If I'm looking to the side, that's where my notes are. He called on authorities to fight corruption within the judicial system, and he warned that corruption is contagious. And that's not all, by the way. The media part, tarnishing the reputation of the judiciary, he basically says that the media is basically making it worse than it is. But in none of what he says does he acknowledge that the judiciary, like Iran's judiciary, is not independent. It is part of the Islamic regime's bureaucracy. And what's really funny is that Khamenei himself controls the judiciary. So essentially, the judges are also prosecutors in the Islamic judicial jurisprudence. So if you go to court, the prosecutor is also the judge. And the entire system reports to Khamenei. But now he's saying that it is the judiciary that's corrupt. Meanwhile, they all report to him, and he elects the leader of the judiciary. None of it makes sense, but it is just, hopefully Iranians are awake to this.
Saudi Arabia is stepping on an offshore field shared with Iran. Has the Islamic regime responded?
Nope. Not really. So here's the story. There's an offshore field. The Islamic regime calls it Arash. Kuwait and Saudi Arabia call it Dure. So there's two different names for it. But it was discovered in 1967. 310 million barrels of oil are supposed to be technically in there. This is an $11 billion deal, according to Saudi Arabia, for them. Iran is claiming that 40% of the field belongs to them. It's in their judicial territorial waters. And they're saying that they have to be part of any action, anything that basically happens in that field needs to go by them because they own 40% of the land. And they're saying that basically any development without his consent is breaking their international laws. So in March last year, Kuwait and Saudi Arabia are like, too bad, they started the extracting process from the field. So they've already started. Meanwhile, the chairman of the board of the directors of Association of Iranian Oil and Gas Drilling Companies has actually criticized the regime for their inaction. He says, quote, "It seems that we have surrendered the fields to our neighbors." And another Iranian official says, "We have not done anything." So essentially, we have 40%. It is recognized that 40% of the 310 million barrels of oil belongs to Iran, but we're not doing anything. And Saudi Arabia and Kuwait are beginning the process.
I mean, it sounds like Iran has so many other issues that they're just kind of letting this happen because they don't know which fire to put out.
But in all, like we are one of the biggest exporters of oil and gas, and when there's new discoveries made, and this is not new, it's from 1967, but it just goes to show how many oil fields are actually being expropriated. But Saudi and Kuwait, the thing is that, Imanjun, when you don't stake claim to the land, the squatters will get it, and it's the same. Under international law, they've started, they're not going to go back and go, okay, well, the oil we took, we're going to give it back to you. This is a massive loss for our people.
Failing our people once more. There's like a long list of failures. The Islamic regime is taking Canada to UN court over civil damages claims. Sorry, what are the accusations?
So the case was announced today at the International Court of Justice, which is the ICJ. It's also known as the World Court. So this all stems from the downing of the Ukrainian passenger flight PS 752. essentially the Islamic regime shot it down. They're saying that it was human error that caused this. All 176 passengers died aboard this flight. The Islamic regime is accusing Canada of allegedly breaching Tehran's state immunity by designating it a sponsor of terrorism after the incident. And the regime also says Canada violated international obligations to uphold the principle of sovereignty immunity. And on top of that, they're saying that Canada violated international obligations by allowing people to seek civil damages against Tehran after the flight was down. So after the flight was down and it was believed that it was the Islamic regime that did it on purpose, the families of the victims requested compensation. The Canadian courts allowed for it to happen, and under international law, you're allowed to seek compensation, but the Islamic regime is basically saying that Canada was out of order for doing that.
Iran and Qatar have inked new economic and security deals. What does that mean for Iranians?
So we're going to proceed this with Imanjan and I have both lived in Qatar, and we're both very much aware of what it looks like in that country, and the political climate and the economic climate, and this agreement is just more suffering for Iranians. I mean, you'll see how it gets to more suffering. So basically, the deputy interior minister of Iran met with his counterpart from Qatar. There's an agreement for a prisoner release. Apparently, Qatar had arrested Iranian fishermen that had encroached on its quote-unquote territorial waters. So apparently, those fishermen will be released. They also discussed drug smuggling. Apparently, it's happening in the Persian Gulf, and they're going to work together to curb it. Another sticking point was the removal of the need to book a hotel for Iranians. So for Iranians traveling to Qatar, they were apparently required to book hotel rooms first. So you'd have to have a proof of stay, which makes it incredibly difficult for them to travel. So that's removed. There's also talk about trade, cargo inspections, and also residency rights for Iranian businessmen. So we have to understand that whenever these kind of deals are made, it actually empowers the IRGC, and it also empowers the Islamic regime. It basically strengthens them. It means more money for them, and it means more legitimacy, and their stay in power just becomes stronger. The worst part of this deal, Imanjun, you remember the laborers that we all witnessed in Qatar? Well, there's now an agreement to recruit about 2,000 to 3,000 Iranian experts and quote technicians to work in various economic and industrial projects. And for anyone who's not aware, these laborers are under the harshest conditions.
Horrible conditions. I remember when I was working at the Ritz-Carlton, like at 6 o'clock in the morning, they would be shuttled in like a bus that holds like 50 people with like 100 people. And they would be like 10 people to a room staying together, like working 18 hours a day for like, I want to say at the time, like $10 a day or something. Like it's modern day slavery. I mean, it was unreal. And like in like 125 degrees summer Qatar weather, like outdoor. I mean, so many of these individuals like would die, especially the skyscraper building that they were doing. I mean, unfortunately, like their lives were never valued. It's tragic. Speaking of tragic, there's horrific news about orphanages in Iran. What are the allegations?
So Etemad published a disturbing news back on June 11th, which I just got wind of it myself, but I thought it was important to share. So this news, Etemad is one of Iran's daily newspapers, and it's a story that involves dozens of kids in state-run orphanages that are run by clerics. It reveals that there are multiple cases of child abuse at an orphanage called, basically it's under what's called the State Welfare Organization of Iran. And basically I'm not going to go into the description, but there are horrid descriptions of physical, of torture, like torture that you hear of at Evin prison on children happening at an orphanage. And it also outlines a plan that the clerics had, and it says, quote, they devised a scoring system to evaluate the behavior of children and subject them to serious psychological torture. So it's believed that the abuse started 8 years ago, at least. There are some individuals who've been reprimanded, but in these situations, nothing really happens. And the government officials have actually requested a retraction to the article.
Always putting things under the rug. We're hearing about a young man who died after police raided a party. What do we know about that story?
We don't know much. We know that it happened at a party in Mashhad where both men and women were in attendance. The Islamic regime police forces conducted a raid after they got a tip from neighbors. Allegedly, he fell from the 6th floor balcony, but we don't know if he was pushed. The reports are saying that he died under mysterious circumstances, and the police haven't made an official statement. For those who aren't aware, under the Islamic regime in Iran, it's prohibited for men and women to party together. You can if you're a member of the same family, and we often see them at gatherings and at weddings, but usually there's a large bribe that's paid to the local police force to make sure that you're not raided. So restrictions are ignored, but there are times when the police just decide to go beyond, and there are horrific instances of, teens, young adults being arrested, being tortured, being jailed, simply for having a good time with friends, and died in this circumstance.
Can we get to updates on protesters and detainees?
Got some really bad news, Imanjan. We've been talking about Hushida Zari, who's a cousin of our near and dear Shiva Saber, who is leading or one of the leaders of the Azadi Festival. Her cousin is Baha'i, and as we've been mentioning pretty much every week on this broadcast, Baha'is are not even treated as second-class citizens under the Islamic regime. They're just not even recognized. They don't have regular access to education, to healthcare, to just basically anything, any government-run service or resource. They're essentially deprived of living a normal life. Their land is often confiscated from them. Their homes are destroyed for absolutely no reason other than being Baha'i. And Hushida Zari is a judo coach. He's a prominent member of the community. He's a prominent businessman. He's a father. He's a husband. And he's basically was arrested a few weeks ago under zero clue what the charges were against him. But now he has been officially handed a sentence. It's 5 years in prison. There's a very large fine. He's under house arrest. They're preventing him from doing business once he comes out. And they're also revoking his passport for a time period. So let's keep his name alive. Like, just because a sentence was handed, it doesn't mean that we can't still help him. We should use the hashtag #FreeHushida to keep his story alive and hopefully get his sentence reduced or, completely abolished. There is a story that we talked about last week that we didn't, or that I mentioned that I would mention this week, and it was a deputy UN High Commissioner officer who put out a report about the incidences of death and executions this year. So I'm just going to do a rundown to give everybody a perspective. In 2022, 582 people were executed. That is a 75% increase from 2021. 333 people were executed in 2021, 582 in 2022. There were 3 children among those who were executed in 2022. Of the total number of executions, they say 256 were drug-related offenses, but we know oftentimes these charges are fabricated against individuals. Thousands of children are estimated to have been among those arrested during the protest. At least 44 kids and 10 girls were reportedly killed by security forces during this round of protests. And as of March 2nd this year, more than 1,000 students, the majority of whom are girls, have been reportedly affected by poisoning at 91 schools in 20 provinces. That's a poison gas release. So that is an official number from the UN.
We're going to make sure that at Azadi Festival on Monday, we're going to have an area designated for Hushida, actually, and we're going to mention it and have some kind of call to action, and just everybody go there to share it in their story. The whole, say their name to save their life is going to be something that we're going to make sure we do for Hushida. What are the action items this week? And what are the hashtags?
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to talk over you. The hashtags are #FreeHushida. We're definitely going to keep his name out there. Mohamed Bogadu, we don't have a word on whether he got a stay of execution or whether he will be released. IRGC terrorists. When it comes to unlawfully detained prisoners, it's Saif Sharmad, Tumash Salehi, Saman Yassin, and the mainstays, of course, are Masa Amini and Iran Revolution.
And you're on a mission to educate all Iranians about one specific thing. What is your final message for our listeners?
There's a couple of things, but honestly, the one sticking point is that our language is called Persian and English. Like, if you look at the root of languages, the Indo-Persian languages is actually at the root of so many languages, so many Asian languages. Maybe we'll actually do a culture segment one day so we could talk about it. So it's actually a word used in linguistics. Persian is the name of our language. Farsi is the name of our language. وقتی که به فارسی حرف میزنیم. But when we're using it in English, let's not erase our own history.
Thank you so much, Parishon. خسته نباشی. As always, we appreciate you and wishing you a wonderful rest of the evening. با امیده.
Thank you. Azadi.
آزادی.